and she's been coming here to Guanajuato for how many years?
It's my 5th year.
5th year coming, so, she has a close relationship with Resplandor. And have you worked with the, which group have you been working with or independently?
So working with the Indicador de la Tierra established was multiple place.
Okay, so the Earth Keepers program, so you're gonna get to meet some people from that group, but she's been instrumental in making sure that that's also an accessible program. And today, she'll spend an hour with us and really we can think about how it applies to our week at Resplandor as well. So thank you, and it might just be a minute while they get the PowerPoint up.
I can.
I would plan on the press. It's like it's like a Smith song.
Yes, More signals no
Well,
Yeah, you can see that in
yeah.
Pay attention to the arrows.
the girls, yeah. I did it along with you.
A ver, ¿dónde HDMI?
Sorry.
HDMI.
No, pero ¿quieres internet como en ese? Entonces, está. It is.
So my handwriting's very wonderful.
It's
decipher it.
oh. Y luego para mandar esa señal al. Bueno. Porque no se va a ver dibujar. Sí, los videos. Pregúntale a. Okay.
Lo siento. Difficulties technological.
It's the theme of the day, so it's not, you don't worry.
Yeah.
Of the whole stuff. Yeah, not even the day.
So you can see it. So I'm gonna get started because I know everyone's hungry and I don't want to keep you all too long. All I can say is what a hard presentation to follow from Dr. Anama.
That's it.
Anama?
Yeah.
That theme and that topic, it is very heavy, but it's also very important. I'm also in special education, and so realizing how disconnected we are from the impact of the things we do in the classroom to later in life, what the students have to experience, is something that all educators really have to reflect on. And so I'm coming from this presentation to share my work and research that I've done that has allowed me to heal my relationship with teaching and the education system. And so I'm going to go over 2 projects that I did, and I'm going to go over a little bit of my research, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more lighthearted and you guys will find it interesting. So I work with accessibility and environmental education, y lo siento para los translations no son nada, porque yo estudio español aquí cuando en Guanajuato, so yo practico, pero accesibilidad en el aprendizaje ambiental. So a bit of background. I started teaching in an inner public school in St. Louis City when I was 21, 22. And within the first year, I had a lot of conflict with school leadership and also with my colleagues, mainly due to advocacy for my students with disabilities. They were not included in the annual programs. They were not included in the celebrations that parents came to. So when we had the Christmas celebration and show that went on, my students were not a part of that. They weren't practicing music during music time. They were just assumed you can't do it because they have a disability. And so they didn't even get the option. And that's a really big key that we're kind of talking about today, is the opportunity. You have to provide an opportunity for someone to participate and engage before you can say they can or can't do something and whether or not it can or can't benefit them. And I was a very strong advocate, and that caused a lot of tension. I confronted the music teacher, I confronted the art teacher, and I confronted the administration. And that caused a lot of tension. And so when we reflect on our current political state in the United States right now, I feel like that's kind of been my experience with education in the United States the entire time. There's always been the othering of those that take more time, more attention, more patience, more care, and more love. And so I found myself breaking as a teacher. I didn't know where to turn, and I didn't know how to refill my cup to keep pouring into others. And that's something that's really hard to do. You can't pour from an empty cup. Has anyone heard that phrase? You simply can't. And so when your cup is empty, what do you do to refill it? Does anyone want to share? Mama, what do you do to refill your cup when it's empty? We have a call on you.
Read a good book, get yourself on fire.
I immerse myself in nature personally.
Have lives, like Dr. Anima was saying, have a life outside of your work also. Your work can be your entire life.
Exactly. And as academics, that's hard to break away from. It's hard to not sit down at the end of the day and be like, oh, well, I didn't get graded done. Or I don't have my lesson prep for tomorrow. Oh, I didn't finish my modules for this week. What am I going to do? Because there has to be time for you. And so one way that I found that worked for me was to create spaces where students can interact with nature in a productive way that is both structured and unstructured. And so I found myself learning about environmental learning, often referred to as environmental education. And so this is a picture of the first garden that I built at the elementary school that I worked at. I started that within my second or third year, when I was considering leaving the field. I was ready to be done. I was ready to not have to hear the stories of what was happening at my students' home, what was happening in their lives, and the criticism I was receiving for not being stricter or firmer. And so I went to the garden and I decided I was going to rebuild it into a space my students could go to. And so I'm going to share a bit about that journey. And if you need it to be summarized in Spanish, please let me know. I will try my best. And so this was my first time ever seeing my students have autonomy. I worked in a self-contained classroom for a few years, and then I moved to a part-time inclusion classroom. So educación especial con educación general. Todos los estudiantes en la misma aula. No, aula. y mis estudiantes no tienen un lugar que con seguridad y cosas verdes para jugar durante el día. They had a recess in a little asphalt area that was fenced in, that was separate from the rest of the recess area that everybody else went to. And so it was like a little prison cell. My students hated going outside, my aides hated going outside, and I hated it. And so I decided to create a space where they could go.
So in the school, like, the students with disabilities were completely segregated, it sounds like you're saying.
Yes, so when we would go out to recess, there was this whole big outdoor area, there was an outdoor classroom, and it was all asphalt for all kids. But then my students went into a little section of it that was fenced off from everyone. And that's where they got to play. It was maybe 10 by 12, if that. And so I'd have about 8 to 10, up to 15 students at a time, trying to get them into that space. Because they believed it was too much work to support those students with being able to play with the rest of the class. Which to me, what are you talking about? What do you mean? But I didn't have to support at that time. And so building the garden there was my way of finding a way to heal my relationship to teaching, as well as bringing a space to my students that they could access. And it was a very long journey, and I probably took on way too big of a project. So we had a very small area that had a couple of broken down beds from a previous teacher who had had a community garden there. And I had some volunteers from the community, and we reimagined the whole space. So it went from, we literally had my dad come out who does irrigation, and he built the irrigation lines. We mapped out the whole area. And as you can see, the amount of work it was to prepare it and getting the soil ready to fill those beds. Drilling the irrigation lines, because one of the things with school gardens and green spaces is that they're hard to maintain. And so once you have a teacher who leaves, who has that passion, they fall apart. And so how did I wanted to maintain it once I was gone. And so putting in the irrigation was a way to keep it going. By cutting out the labor of having to water all the beds. And so we also put in a fence because, again, safety. I was working with preschoolers, niños pequeños, and with a busy street right there, it wasn't safe for them to just go out and play without me always having to corral them. And so building the fence allowed us to make that space safe. And I learned how to build a fence, which means I dug each of those 32 holes. It was me and one other person who did it. And we put the fencing by ourselves. That's another picture of my dad giving us his lovely time. And we put in each post and each fence piece one by one. We actually did the measurements wrong. So I had to learn how to cut steel. It was great. And one by one, the fences finally came up. And so we had a completely safe area that the kids could just be free in. And so this is a picture of a completed garden with my class in it. I also raised ducks, so there's my 2 ducks that were there as a part of it. But once the fence was constructed and the beds were there, it was immediately a space that was safe for them to go. Once we came through that fenced area, I didn't have to tell them not to run. I didn't have to tell them not to scream. They had no restrictions. And I saw social interactions between students that I had never seen before. I saw students work and support other students that I had never seen before. I had a student in a walker who really was isolated in the classroom. And once we were in this green space, she had peers come up to her, asking her, do you want help getting over here? Do you want to come see this with me? Do you want to come over and do this? And I did not anticipate that. I didn't think that there would be more social interaction just by changing the location. And so I learned a very valuable lesson. The space that we provide education in, the environment of our schools, dictates a lot of the experience students have. And when we have a student who has been from kindergarten to 1st grade to 3rd grade told, you're a bad student, you're a difficult student, you don't listen, that becomes their identity as a student. And it doesn't matter if they go to a different classroom, because within those four walls, they have that same identity. But when you take those walls away, they don't have that same identity, and it gives them a chance to re-identify themselves as a learner. And to me, that was what showed me there's a way forward in education, even when I'm feeling constricted by all the politics and regulations and financial aspects, where I'm told we can't do that in an IEP meeting, that's too much money. We can't bring in standing desks, that's too much money. But then they'll go and they'll repair something in the football field. And even with IDA, which is that American legislation that supports students with disabilities, which has now just been moved to a different department, I didn't have any backing to fight against that. And so in 2016, after the garden was built, this was our first crop. We had one of my students who had a very difficult time eating anything new due to sensory, would go and picked a cherry tomato and fell in love. To the point where the parents actually started buying cherry tomatoes and they started growing them at home. And that child then started to try anything that came out of the ground. Now, if they went to a restaurant and tomatoes were put in front of her, she would not touch them. But when they went home, they built a garden. And the parents came back and told me about 2 years ago, I got a message from them that she still goes into that garden. And that's still one of the only ways to introduce new foods to her. So I also got to learn the disconnect we have between the food that we're eating and where it comes from. And oftentimes when you ask a child, where does a chicken nugget come from? In the US, they may not be able to tell you it comes from a chicken. But to be honest, there's no part of the chicken that's actually the nugget. So a lot of times when you think about the things that impact our health, our ability to focus, our energy, our motivation, they're connected to what we eat and our ecosystem that we are part of, which is a part of nature. And so this was a way to bring students back into that connection of what they're putting in their mouth was something that could grow. And they bought into it. And that buy-in fuels motivation. We even got to play in leaves. In St. Louis City, it's one of the most dangerous cities in the US. And actually, there's not a lot of safe green spaces for kids to explore. And so for a lot of my students, this was the first time they ever played with leaves. For those of you who are from Guanajuato, there's not a lot of green space here, right? Within the city. And so when you think about these type of opportunities, I'd be curious to know if students here in Guanajuato have ever had that opportunity of playing in a pile of leaves, running barefoot through grass.
I am from here from Ecuador, and I can see and I know some schools have these green spaces because are very big. But here in the center of the city, it's very difficult because a big part of the school are so small, and they prefer have more classmates from yeah, classmates, like green space. Here, I think we specifically tell doing two schools here in the center. One don't have any space to play or any space to more students, because the system are in some places and some schools are job with more students that would be that would be job in the one.
Thank you for sharing. So just jumping to now, this is some pictures that I was sent to by the school principal. They're still using the school garden. This is a bench that flips into half of a desk. So you can push two together and you have like a picnic table that an Eagle Scout built for us. They're still using them and they still have all the kids come out. They do math, they do science, they do reading out there. Some teachers take their students out to test out in the garden. But it is still a very used space. It's actually been expanded upon. They were able to connect the irrigation to build more beds, which took away some of that free space they could run. but it allowed them to maintain it. And so this is one of the new beds that they created, that they were able to connect to the irrigation system we put in. Yes,
Is it still a special education space?
it's used by everyone.
Everyone?
So I, as a special education teacher, I made it for my students, but I also wanted to establish it as a place that could be built upon and maintained when I was gone. Because I knew that once I left, there was nobody that was appointed as that person taking over, and that's when a lot of school gardens and community gardens start to fall apart.
More inclusive.
And so I really designed it with the intent of thinking about ease of maintenance and how to ensure it could be maintained moving forward. Now it's used by all teachers, not just the students with disabilities, but the students in the self-contained classroom do still use it mainly for recess. Because the only other area they have is that very small fenced-in area in the back asphalt. So that's actually from this year, where they added that new bed. And so that brings me now to the work that I did at Resplendor. And so coming out of the school system with that experience, I wanted to find a way to kind of expand that and build upon it. And I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Fletcher before he retired and agreed to do the study abroad, which was an amazing opportunity that completely changed a lot of my perspectives on the importance of understanding what it means to be a language learner. And that first year I had to teach a class and I was not fluent in Spanish. And I had the students helping me with my pronunciation and telling me the correct way to say a sentence. And that changed my understanding of the way we talk about English learners in the United States and bilingual education. To just, how can we not consider this a part of natural language acquisition? Which is, as some of you know, a very unpopular opinion in the United States these days. And so I was given the opportunity to build a garden at Resplendor. And so this is a picture of it when it was first completed. It does look like tombs, like a little graveyard. But it was in the first summer after I started my doctorate program at the University of Arizona. And I really took a deep dive into environmental learning. When I was building the garden at Mason Elementary, I was really reading more about environmental literacy and what it meant to be literate in environmental literacy. And so then in my doctorate, I went into environmental learning, which is more of a broad umbrella. It covers outdoor learning, gardening, conservation, interpretation, which I still don't necessarily understand that branch of environmental education, but it is a part of it. And I had the opportunity at that time, I was also working with Dr. Gonzalez for the first time I got published, and I really had the opportunity to explore cultural relevant curriculum and pedagogy. And so it was a very unique time for me as I was trying to figure out a way to take this into research. How do you take this physical, tangible work that I was doing and translate it into academic-based research that somebody or anybody would care about?
Michelle, is that on the screen? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's adding line.
Oh, it's your editing.
So I don't have to read it as it goes, you can kind of just see it. I did try to translate it, so I hope it's kind of, okay, here we go. And so this whole project, I want to say it took me the full 2.5, 3 months to do. The plot of land, Todd asked me, do you want it to be tilled? And here I'm thinking American tilling. Yes, of course, let's till it, let's level it out, that'll be great. I didn't know what tilling looked like in Mexico. And so I came back and it was giant chunks of earth. I can't believe I didn't take a picture of it. That I then took at least a couple of weeks, if not more, best shape of my life. I was breaking up all those hunks of dirt and leveling the land. And so I had to level all of that land before we could start building it. And that took the longest amount of time. But during that time, I was actually able to develop relationships with the workers who were finishing building Dr. Fletcher's house. And they were the ones who actually helped with building the beds when it was ready. And we mapped it all out together. We put in 2 different compost bins so that there was a way for when there were events, they had a way to dispose of compostable waste. And that was really what I had built and how I left it. And so in 2021, when I came back, they had already painted the beds. I think you had volunteers that came, Todd, to paint the beds, and they had already started planting in it. And so this circle bed was meant to be for native plants specifically, so that students could kind of start to learn about their ecosystem and where they live. A lot of the area around Resplendor, who's been there so far? You guys all gone out yet? Okay. So as you know, a lot of the land is being tilled, right, and farmed and worked. There's not a whole lot of natural growth space that is accessible to even those who live there unless they go towards the Cerro. And so I wanted to have a space where students could see what are those native plants that grow around the area that they live. And I don't think I even left it filled with dirt. So I think that happened after I left too. But all I wanted to do when that first came out was build a foundation that others could then work with and build off of. And so I didn't leave instructions. I didn't leave directions. I didn't appoint anybody to take over the work. It was, here's the foundation. Now I handed it off to the community for what's going to work best for you. And in 2026, now it has exploded. They now have a chicken coop with rabbits. I remember going and picking out those first rabbits with you, Todd, and a greenhouse. And I think you have a rainwater collection now too.
It's just a Tinaco, we don't bring.
No. And it is used by community members. It is used by educators during the different programs. And they have that native bed that's really thriving with the cactus. And they harvest from it. And the students get to see where food comes from. And so by creating that space, I was able to give opportunity to connect back with nature and to connect back with the food source that we have. And part of the reason why I built the beds up was for accessibility. And so if you think of a student who is in a wheelchair or somebody who is older that has a hard time bending down, they're able to sit on the edge of the beds to still work with the soil. And that's something I had learned from my first project, was that having the beds really low actually was an accessibility feature. And so I wanted to change that. And so to me, this just makes my heart glow to know that it's still being used and students are still having that opportunity to connect to their food and have that experience of planting a seed and watching it grow. When we think about what's happening with a lot of our students' health and their ability to move within our schools, movement's been cut out. And a lot of high schools in the US have started eliminating electives and different ways of students to engage in their learning process. I don't know of many schools that still have shop where you work with wood. I don't know many schools that still have home ec where you get taught how to cook. And so this is a way for me to bring that opportunity back into schools when they don't have those classes that allow that student exploration. And so connecting that to my research, that was really hard for me. I didn't know how to connect it to my research, but I knew this is where I wanted to continue going. And so I didn't include slides on it because I didn't want to overwhelm you with pictures, but now I'm overwhelming you with text, so I don't know what's better. I worked with the Cooper Center for Environmental Learning out in Tucson, Arizona, to implement the curriculum Cuidadores de la Tierra, which is Earth Keepers. And that was a 3-year project to get all the props built, to get the location set. It prompted Todd to actually buy land at the Cerro del Sombrero. Have they gone and seen that yet? Not yet.
Maybe we'll get a chance,
I'll hope. And with that work, they've been able to have students come in for a 3-day, 2-night program where they camp outside for 2 nights and they have immersive experiences out in nature. And with doing that work, I really started to wonder, okay, so here's environmentalism and environmental education. That's inherently ableist. When you think about the history of the environmentalist movement, it is inherently ableist. This idea of pristine nature, nature that's untouched by man. Well, if you make it accessible, there's a lot of pushback because accessibility means more construction, more development, more change. But the reality is, once you've already gone into a place and have made any type of trail, it's no longer pristine nature. And so taking away the idealism of being immersed in nature is a personal challenge that you have to overcome. You have to have the physical ability to get into that space. It was something I really wanted to understand. How can we change that perspective? Because for me, that's where I connect with myself and I find myself healing, is when I'm immersed in nature. But if I weren't able to climb a mountain to get there, how would I have that experience? And why am I the only one who gets to have it? That's not equitable. And so trying to figure out how can I create a way to start to unpack this complicated connection between individuals with disabilities having access to nature, not just through the garden in the school, but on a bigger scale. And that's when I learned that field trips themselves are also a privileged experience that most kids don't get to go to. And that caused me to reflect on my experience as a teacher. There were so many places I wanted to take my students, but I couldn't because of random limitations. So one of them was if students had transportation on their IEP, well, then we could use a bus to take them on a field trip. But if my other students were from an area that wasn't near the school that got transportation, and their parents had to bring them, they didn't get to ride a bus. And somehow that equated to I couldn't get a bus to take them on a field trip. That's a systematic barrier. And no matter how much logic I threw at it, it didn't change that barrier. It was always a no. And so thinking about how can I break this down? And so I decided to look at what was currently being done at field trip based environmental learning programs across the US to support accessibility. And I looked at it from the frame of universal design for learning. Have any of you heard of universal design for learning? Does anyone want to take a shot at explaining it?
Isn't the idea that if we make everything accessible, we don't need to tailor certain things to be accessible? So for example, like if we give, this may be a bad example, but for extra time on tests, if we say you can take extra time on tests, then, or we say recording lectures, like, is this the right direction?
Finish your thought process, don't get clarification first.
Recording lectures. Some students need to be able to go back and rewatch a lecture. Some students can't go to lectures every week. Los estudiantes que no pueden visitar las lecturas todos los días, todas las semanas, necesitaría los lecturas digital. Entonces, si nos recordan. Am I doing this even a little bit right?
Yeah.
Okay. Si nos recordan y publicar videos de las lecturas, podemos crear un environmento más accesibilidad.
So yes, that's one of the most common assumptions with universal design for learning is that you are making everything accessible to every single person. Now, when you take that and you try to put that into action, do you think that would be something that is easy to do? So oftentimes when we talk to educators about universal design for learning and rethinking curriculum from that lens, the pushback is that's too much. We can't do that. We can't consider every single student we would have and design a curriculum that would be accessible to all those students. And the reality is that is impossible. But what universal design for learning looks at is it provides a way for you to have multiple means for expression, multiple means for engagement, and multiple means for, I'll like another representation of that knowledge. And so when I like to explain it as a buffet. So if you were going to invite, if I were to invite all of you over for dinner, and I needed to make sure I addressed all of your dietary restrictions, that would almost look like me making an individual meal for each one of you, right? Based on your preference. What's your favorite food? What do you like? What can you have? What you can't have? Now, making a meal for each one of you, that would take me a few days. I don't think I could do it in one day. But if I knew what your limitations were, what you couldn't have, what you can have, what preferences were, I could come up with 3 to 4 dishes that meet those requirements that you could then choose from. And so by creating a buffet where you have the choice to select what you want versus here is your meal, here's your plate, this is what you get, I take away the labor from myself to prepare something that you can eat. And when we think about designing our lessons to be accessible, you don't have to start big, you can start very small. So like what I did here, did I use AI to help me? Yes, because I did not know how to translate my question. But I tried to do it myself first, and then I went back and got support. I knew that there were going to be some of you who did not know English, and that I was going to be too anxious while standing up here to really try to practice my Spanish. And so I made sure that I had as much of my slides with both English and Spanish as I could. Does that mean that's a perfect translation? No. But does it help you get the idea? And that makes it more accessible. When I think about how I want students to show me what they know, if I have a timed test and one of my students takes longer to process questions and information, giving that student more time to take the test is not giving them an advantage. It's meeting them where their instructional level is at so that they can be successful to show what they know. And if I know a student has a really hard time with writing, so think of a student with cerebral palsy. Does everyone know what cerebral palsy is? Okay.
Parálisis cerebral.
¿Qué está en español?
Parálisis cerebral.
Parálisis cerebral.
Just translate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to learn it. I can't pronounce that right. Most times individuals with cerebral palsy have a hard time writing and using their hands in a very easy and fluid motion. I actually had the opportunity to relearn my understanding of the condition because I currently have a colleague at the University of Houston downtown who has cerebral palsy and had his undergraduate degree in architecture and is also an artist. He draws and paints. Does he use his hands for everything? No. But he has adapted materials that allow him to engage in that work. And so when I started to really think about what do I want to do with my research, I wanted to incorporate universal design for learning in how we are engaging students with nature and field trip-based opportunities. And to even know where to start with that, I had to figure out what is already happening in the field. And so the responses I got were obviously not from every state, unfortunately, but I had a pretty good representation of the United States in my responses to my surveys. A few states didn't have a whole lot of environmental organizations that I was able to find. There's no catalog of open organizations that you can just go and look at. Some states do, not all. And so I had a very elaborate search process that I did with a research assistant. And the locations that we were able to connect to was about 10 per state, give or take. And so the responses were I had one from Texas, one from Louisiana. You guys can read it, so I can go into it. I had the most from Arizona, Colorado, and North Carolina. I also did interviews, and the interviews were my way of kind of asking some deeper questions about the initiatives that they were doing to support accessibility at their locations, to try to understand how they were doing it, the funding that they were using to get it, and how they were getting support from either their organization or the funders who are helping them do that work. And so I did not interview everyone from every state, but I did do 15 interviews in total. And so some things that I learned were from the lens from overall accessibility. So just in general, what are you doing to make your programs more accessible? I found that collaboration was one that was really important for them. So that means that they were communicating with the school before students came to get an idea of the student population before they got there and the needs of the students before they got there. A lot of organizations, when I asked them about pre-communication, they didn't have any other than how many students, here's what you owe, here's your time to show up. So those who did have that support with collaboration were able to meet the needs of learners because they were able to prepare for them. And that connects right there to communication, having that open communication with the organizations and the schools that they were working with to get that information prior. And then goal-oriented growth. And so that was having one specific target that they had and figuring out ways to address that. And so one example for goal-oriented growth was one program was putting all of their environmental educators through a ASL class, which is American Sign Language, because they were building a program in collaboration with the School for the Deaf of Hard of Hearing. And so in anticipation of their educators being able to deliver the curriculum to those students, they knew they needed to learn ASL. And so they got funding and they put them into class. And so every single person, even a few of the volunteers, went to ASL class. And that's goal-oriented action. And then adapted programs and experiences. So adapted programs and experiences, that's a very, very large theme. And as you can see, it entails field locations and facilities that are physically accessible, the utilization of different instructional strategies, adaptation of materials, as well as support staff and personnel from the school. And so, trying to think of a way to, what was a good example of that one? So there was one organization in Colorado who provided adventure-based education experiences. And they had their first individual who was a paraplegic, which means that they really had no functionality of their body. And they wanted to do kayaking. And so what they had to do was use a double kayak. And it was an adapted kayak. And adapted kayaks, there's a few different ones. But the one that they explained to me was it's pretty much impossible for it to roll over. It's a lot wider and it has support rails along it that help keep it balanced in the water. And so with having one person in there with them who was doing the paddling, they were able to put their hands on the paddle as well and paddle with them. They couldn't go very far. They couldn't go for a very long time, but it gave that individual a sense of independent engagement and an activity they wanted to try. And then pre-designed programs and experiences. Already preparing, if we're going to have somebody who has a physical impairment, making sure that we identify the locations that we implement activities that are hard to get to are changed. So if I have somebody who has a walker, that means we can't climb up these stairs to get to that activity spot. Where's an alternative activity spot that we can go to?
I have a quick question about this. So this is, these are some of like the, I guess it's a question. Are these showing some of the great inclusive strategies used, or not necessarily that these were the most salient?
This is simply what was out there.
Okay.
As far as what I would like to do with my research moving forward, and going and actually visiting the sites and seeing some of these practices in action, I think at that point we could look at doing a rating scale for what's effective and not effective. But this is a baseline of at least what's being done. And so for frequency, so when you look at collaboration, it broke down to family, school, or organization. And so there was 69 organizations that I had represented in my data collection. So of the 69, 22 of them were using collaboration to support overall accessibility. And one thing that I found pretty interesting was that when I looked at the adapted experiences, that was happening pretty frequently and really with program delivery. So the program delivery was more than having the alternative locations. So how they delivered their program was what they were changing versus changing the location. and some were doing both. But the data really helped break down when it was occurring and how frequently it was occurring. So just finding the themes didn't really give me an idea of, well, how many places are doing it? If one organization is doing this, but none of the other organizations are, is it an effective practice that I would recommend being replicated by another organization? Can't say. And so the frequency data helped me break down how often it was occurring. And then using a bit more of that lens of universal design for learning, I looked at both physical accessibility and curricular accessibility. And does anyone want to give a shot at why I broke it down? Or why you think it's important to break it apart? It's like crickets in here.
One thing that comes to mind for me is like, if you're not in a field that's really steeped in disability, oftentimes when you think about disability, you think about physical disabilities, which is more akin to like universal design rather than universal design for learning.
Yes, and universal design is a lot more about the architecture, the build, the layout, whereas universal design for learning is looking both at the physical accessibility as well as the curriculum and how students are engaging with it at a cognitive level. And so I wanted to know, were they doing anything for the curriculum, or was it all focused on just physical impairment? Those disabilities that you can clearly see when somebody comes into a room, what their capability is. And so for the physical accessibility, we'll get into the frequencies next, so you'll see they are much more common than the curricular ones. There was a lot of trails and pathways that were being developed. And what was interesting about the trails and pathways.
Yeah, I think that this concept is really important to understand, to be understood. So if Tausha can explain it in Spanish briefly for just
With that concept of
concept or
universal design?
the universal design and bold differences of that you just mentioned. Exactly, just like that.
I don't know if I'm doing it, but I'll try and please jump in. Okay, universal design.
No, what I mean, I did understand, I think, but what I'm telling you is if you can explain it in Spanish,
Okay,
just for the others.
no sé si puedo, pero voy a tratar
Okay,
y
I will
todos
try.
podemos ayudar. Pues universal design, diseño universal,
That's it.
es sobre los espacios, architecture.
Que los clases
Ajá, y
estamos hablando de las personas que tienen
más discapacidad vertical, right? Sí.
Ok, entonces está haciendo la distinción entre justamente hacer un currículum que toma en cuenta principalmente las discapacidades físicas y el otro es un currículum más en el sentido cognitivo, ¿no?
Pues es como vamos a diseñar para cómo aprenden la gente. I mean, puede ser los dos. Universal Design for Learning específicamente mirando cómo vamos a diseñar.
Sí,
¿Sabes? En una manera para quitar los barriers, barreras de aprendizaje para los más que podemos, ¿verdad? Entonces, primero era el concepto de diseño universal en campo de architecture. Luego, los de educación empezaron a pensar, pues, ¿cómo podemos usar ese concepto y ponerlo en educación también? Y diseñar al aprendizaje, quitando los barreras también. Entonces, eso es para personas con discapacidades diferentes, no nomás física, pero también es para todos. Todos benefit.
Sí,
Yeah. I mean, todos vamos a aprender mejor con Universal Design for Learning.
sí, muchísimas gracias.
Gracias.
Sorry for the interruption, but I think it was important to have this figure.
Thanks for the support.
We agree.
Está bien. If I wasn't so anxious, I would attempt it, but I'll just stumble too much, so lo siento.
You have 10 minutes now.
10 minutes? Okay.
But, well, maybe if you can finish today, maybe we can find another time. But
I-
just try to.
Yes, I'm almost there, so we're pretty close. So just real quick, one thing about the trails and pathways that I thought was interesting was there were some organizations who had widened their trails and leveled them a bit more for accessibility with wheelchairs and other mobility devices. But when you looked at where they parked, they had no ramps. So you get to the parking lot and you get out of your car, the bus, or whatever your transportation vehicle is. Although the trails were accessible, there was no way to get onto the trails. And to me, that was just okay. But I didn't have a way to really capture that, so I just wanted to share it. But making sure they had accessible outdoor locations. And so that meant they would either change the trail to get to a location, or they would select locations they knew were accessible. So one organization would have the students go down to the waterfront to collect water samples. And to make sure that it could be accessible from everyone, they built a little deck that went down to the water level. And so when it rained a lot, they said, you know, we have issues with it flooding and getting covered up, and they have to figure out a way to use material that doesn't rot as quickly as the wood they had used the first time they built it. But they had students who could then still walk on the shoreline to get the water samples, and other students who could use there's like a deck to get out into the water to collect the samples. And so a big focus of universal design for learning is how do you allow students to access it independently? That means you don't have somebody else going hand over hand doing it for them. Because independence equals autonomy. And when you have autonomy over your own learning experience, you have ownership over your identity as a learner and that experience that you're having. And so then again, accessibility of facilities. This was another interesting one. Yes, it's very important for your facilities to be accessible. That means they would have sinks at a lower level for the children, or they would have toilets at a lower level for the children and higher levels for the adults. They didn't necessarily always have trails that were accessible to get to these facilities. And so there was not inherently a connection between these themes. And so then looking at flat out physical accommodations, those were quite common. But another one that was very interesting was developmental goals. So when talking about physical accessibility, a lot of the locations were actually able to say, here's a grant we're working on to do this construction. Here's an issue we've identified. Here's what we're doing to try to address it in a long-term goal. And that is also really important because when you look at the whole systematic change that's required to move toward universal design for learning at environmental learning locations that are in nature, they don't have the funding to do giant projects at the drop of the dime. And so having short-term goals, what can we do within the next 6 months versus what are we doing in the next 5 years was really impactful. And so then the frequency, again, and I'll just let you look at it for a moment. And I'm also can share this with the group chat. And so the next area was curricular accessibility. So this is the content. This is the learning engagement, the learning process, how they engage with the programs. And for one of the things I'm trying to think of with the time limit, so giving them the augmented experiences. So that was for students who couldn't inherently go out into the trails. They were sometimes limited to staying in the indoor trail, but they would do videos. So there was one organization, actually only one, where they would have somebody with a GoPro who was doing the trail with the rest of the class. And then they had a small group who stayed at the inside trail that was accessible for the students, but they had iPads they got to watch. And so although it wasn't the same experience, they got to at least have that semi-exposure through the technology use of what is it like climbing up rocks and stairs when I myself cannot climb a rock. And so that allowed the student to then, when they came back as a whole group, to engage in discussion because they saw what the rest of the class experienced versus having a few kids stay behind on the accessible indoor trail and trying to have basically a separate lesson, which was also kind of common, having segregated experiences. And so I thought it was very reassuring to see that there were augmented experiences occurring. that we're trying to replicate that for students. And so developed materials. This is a big one. When you look over materials for curriculum, one thing we're having in Texas right now is a big pitch for high quality instruction materials, which really does not have any foundation in research or criteria to judge it on. And they're using that to sell basically scripted curriculum to schools. And so students who are preparing to be teachers are given a script. Here's the lesson. You have to follow it. You get no variance. When you have that type of limitation, it's a lot of work to get students to think about, okay, I can still follow this curriculum, but it's really more of a guideline. And how do you think outside of that guideline? And when you look at the material, for a lot of their ELA, the students don't get books anymore. They have a PowerPoint, and the pictures that used to be in the books are now small little thumbnails that they get to see. And oftentimes, even if the teacher prints it for them, they're not printing it in color. So experience of engaging with text is completely different. And so when I talk to my students about how are you going to develop the materials in a way that is engaging for students? Oh, well, here's what I'm given. I have to think back. Okay, what can I tell them to help make it more accessible? And what was interesting was that some organizations were actually, they flat out said, we're putting our stuff in color. All of our material is black and white. So we're going to put it in color because students are more engaged in color. I had other organizations that were adding different languages to their materials. And then those that were incorporating different ways to respond. So not just having students write, they could draw, or they could, I think one was allowing them to like cut the paper to do matching, where the rest of the class was writing out their responses. And having that adapted materials allowed all the students to engage with the material at their level. They were still showing the same knowledge, but in a different way.
Did they say anything about representation as far as images representing like kids with disabilities, racial, ethnic differences, SES differences, just accessing environmental?
No, the closest to that was a few organizations that were updating signage to make it at different levels so that it was more visible for students, or having it posted at both levels so that students could see it above and low, and then including different languages. There was not really much representation discussed in the findings. And again, developmental goals.
Just which languages were there considered? Just to
The most common one was Spanish. There was one, okay, you're asking me to recall. I don't have that
Braille,
data.
any Braille?
well, no, but this is important.
No Braille.
Well, it's interesting just to be aware of the main differences probably, but also to like try to understand which other differences are there to be considered, as the levels of the people cannot probably write, but they can match things that you were having. So I think that it's important to be aware of the diversity, to extend our gaze, to really take into account the others, but it's not exactly like we have.
And the use of visual representation was something that kind of came up a bit more, but I didn't actually ask specifically about language. So that's a good thing to make note of for the future. But when you think about that, and I go back to overall accessibility of the communication, many of the organizations were not collecting demographic data on the students. So they didn't know what language students spoke. They didn't even ask. And so if you don't even ask that type of information for incoming field trips, then there's no way to prepare for it.
Maybe the first step was to asking the right question.
That's the right question, yes. So we are at time. So basically, I'm just gonna move forward. So these are some of the primary questions that I'm hoping to kind of work on with addressing with my research and moving forward. I'm not going to read them. I will share the presentation in the WhatsApp. But any questions? Sorry, I don't have a fun activity. This is my last, this is me, by the way, my quote. So when we bring change to our community, we the impact could be larger than we ever imagined. I learned that through the projects I did at Mason and Resplendor. And so as those of you who are going to be future educators or working with different populations, thinking about giving that opportunity to learn, not walking into a situation where you're going to assume. This applies for every field, doctors, lawyers. You walk in assuming that the other people know your terminology, your verbiage for your specific field, you're already not going to meet them where they're at. But if you go in with the mentality of, I can make this an opportunity to meet them where they're at, and you break down that terminology to a level that's accessible for most, you give that person the opportunity to learn, to then be able to advocate for themselves. As a doctor who comes in and starts talking to you quickly in medical speech and says, here's the issue, here's the problem, here you go, there's no opportunity for that person to advocate for themselves, and there's also a power dynamic. And so when we think about opportunity and the small changes we make within our practices, no matter what field we're in, we really can make large impact.
¿Usan Universal Design for Learning es como?
Here,
Ajá.
they are starting to think about it.
Okay, we can hear.
I'm not sure that there is that concept, but there are more people. Just before, well, just a brief recap of what just said. Bueno, al final lo que estaba diciendo Michelle y me gustó bastante es lo de particularmente esto de generar oportunidades que permitan a las personas aprender, aunque tengan diferentes capacidades de aprendizaje, por decir algo. Y particularmente el hecho de permitir que las personas ganen autonomía y que esto les permita hacerse más capaces para sí mismas de aprender y de desarrollarse. Creo que esa es una de las cosas, digo, no fue lo último que dijo, pero lo dijo hace un rato y me gustó como esa idea de empoderar a las personas en cierto sentido, para que esas personas al tener esas oportunidades que normalmente les han sido negadas, ellas sean capaces de generar su propio aprendizaje y desde la generación de su aprendizaje van a tener una mayor capacidad de ser, como decía, autónomas y autogestivas, digamos, en cierta parte, ¿no? Esa es la parte que me gustó más de la idea. Y claro, abrir los ojos a la diversidad, porque si no somos conscientes de quiénes son los que están y qué tan diversos no tenemos oportunidad de, más bien ellos no vamos a poder generar tanto espacios como currículos que sean verdaderamente universales, que tengan estas diferencias que son consideradas para que las personas realmente puedan aprender. Y esto es algo que es muy importante desde el tipo de no creo que es como lo relevante. Bueno, y también esto de incluso llevarlo, que es muy difícil también de pensar, a los ambientes, o sea, cómo llevas a paseos en donde pueda una persona en silla de ruedas verdaderamente experimentar ciertas cosas y hasta dónde puede acceder y qué tanto ellos pueden experimentar, ver, etcétera, ¿no? Lo que las otras personas que caminan normalmente lo pueden hacer, ¿no? En algún momento creo que señaló, si no me equivoqué, que a veces ya estaban los trails, los caminos hechos, pero no había las rampas. They were not the ramps for getting there. They were already the trail, but there were not the access to get to the trails, ¿no? So, entonces, a veces estaban los caminos ya medio pensados para que sí pudieran moverse en silla de ruedas, pero no estaban las rampas para que pudieran llegar, ¿no? Bueno, yo que tengo ya un rato viviendo en Guanajuato, un día invité a un profesor ya de la tercera edad, un amigo muy querido, que en paz descanse también, y usamos una silla de ruedas y nos dimos cuenta de que Guanajuato no es para sillas de ruedas.
No.
O sea, era realmente muy difícil. Incluso las calles principales y que son tan grandes. O sea, la calle que tenemos aquí de la iglesia, yo recuerdo ahí, bueno, mi hijo que estuvo un poco más fuerte iba llevando la silla, pero con mucho trabajo y realmente no era factible porque las piedras no hacen fácil el movimiento. Entonces, lugares como este que son tan aparentemente, bueno, turísticos, etcétera, deberían ya de haber generado la accesibilidad. No, a mí me da risa, perdón, pero también en los Oxxos está la rampa de acceso que llega directamente al bote de basura. Y en el bote de basura ya no hay manera.
No puedes
No,
salir.
no, ni siquiera le puedes dar la vuelta porque está el bote de basura ahí suficientemente grande que la silla no va a llegar. Y está la rampa.
É um problema del governo pensar sobre o acesso dos discapacitados em geral. Desafortunadamente, não é de acá. Eu tenho uma companheira que vive em Noruega e tem hijo discapacitado e participa de grupo de madres e que lutam por, em Noruega, ter por ejemplo, su niño tiene síndrome de Down y tiene su desarrollo de tamaño disminuido y necesita ir lavar las manos en la escuela o cuando va a un restaurante. Y las madres solicitan que el gobierno obligue a que los espacios públicos tengan baños para personas discapacitadas, para lavar las manos. Porque cuando van a un lugar a comer, não tem como lavar suas mãos. Coisas sencillas como isto. Ou na cidade que há muitas árvores, que põem árvores muito bem, mas não pensam que entre uma árvore e lá espaço, há que passar na silla. Então,
Accessibility.
não se pensa.
Or even in other places when there aren't laws to force places to build them accessibly. And are students able to contact you if they have follow-up questions?
Yes, of course.
That means Dr. Silver's email is right here. Let's give her another round of applause.
When about when the environmental, I think is a